so important is health is prevention of disease processes, and how what you eat is so important towards that. And so we also, so there's the conversation that we like to have is about doing those things, because hey, there is a saying that everybody knows that ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And if we can prevent you from getting a disease, we're way ahead of trying to fix it after you get it. So whatever it's going to take, and then like we said, at least we know and understand that there are some things that we can do with what we put in our system, what we eat, how we treat our bodies, what we do in terms of taking care of our bodies, they're going to help to prevent these problems that we have such a hard time of getting rid of and controlling from actually occurring or actually being as severe as they otherwise would be. So we're here to have this conversation and to talk about this and to invite you to listen and participate with us.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I appreciate you sharing that. I don't want to age you guys, but I'm curious if we go back a little bit and think about maybe the year you grad. So maybe state the year you graduated, and to what extent did lifestyle, come up in your training. So maybe I'll go back to Dr. Graham. Think about what year did you graduate, and how much did they teach you about lifestyle changes as a way to heal people?
Okay. So I'm gonna throw you a curveball, Tony. I spent 2 years as a research assistant in a heart disease prevention program before I got into medical school.
Really?
Oh, I knew a lot then about lipid, cholesterol, diet, and exercise, but I guarantee you there wasn't a single course on nutrition or diet during the time I went to internship, residency, or fellowship. Not a single one.
That's amazing.
Isn't that
And
amazing?
that's what we expect to hear. What about you, Dr. Miller? What's been your
Well, I
experience?
graduated from medical school in 1975, and I will
Okay.
say that the word of diet and exercise is important, but it's about all that I was told.
Yeah.
Not how we go about doing this, how we training and how we teach people, but that they are important, but not how do you do it? What do you do? I mean, So yeah, we understand. So we just never had any real training in terms of how do we go about with that, and in terms of how do we teach our patient. And so most of the things that I've learned is that I had to go and do that research and attend seminars and talk to other folks that had some expertise in that area. It was not given to me in medical school, nor in my residency training. Yeah.
So I guess I'll agree with both of you guys. It was, and being a family doctor, we tended to think holistically, and part of that holistic mindset is to, in theory, think about, how can I heal the whole person? But it was never really quite uh, explained the way I had to learn it later. And I, just like you guys, I had to learn this stuff later, and I had to do it on my own. So I know I got at least 2 years of, I think I graduated in 95, I think, in terms of medical school. But it was literally 2 weeks of nutrition,
Mhm.
and the nutrition was very much focused on um, how to feed uh, someone in the IV.
Mhm.
What are
Yeah.
the vitamins that are, and what's the purpose of vitamin A as an example? But it was really never practical. It never really taught me, okay, a patient's in front of you and they have diabetes. What do you say to that person besides clicking referral to nutrition or dietitian, right?
Right.
And that's what's missing, guys. I think um, that's the problem. Now I got another question, which is, um, when you guys think about how, once you realized this was important, was there a way to incorporate it? Because I do hear doctors having struggles with, how do I have time to talk about this? So what's been your experience with that? Maybe Dr. Miller can go first this time.
Sure.
Yeah. So and this is sort of how I did it with the primary care practice. Is that as I began to learn, I began to try to figure out methods of transferring the information to my patients. So, so part of the way were to get printed material and to go over there with them, as well as the video material became. We in our office we were able to, and actually this was through through one of the pharmaceutical companies, get access to video, to be able to display video material on a constant basis in our waiting room as well as in our examining room. And we were able to eventually to program it in such a way that we could focus on specifics. If we wanted to focus on diet based on the problem that a patient has, and to up to the point that prior to when I retired, we were able to sort of focus it on the particular patient. Patient came in and had a certain disease. My nurse was able to go into that examining room when she put that patient in there and to click on information, whether it be about the medication, it be about their diet, if they were hypertensive, if they were diabetic, if they had congestive heart failure. But that was a long process, and it really didn't, like I said, by the time that I got to the point that I could even do that kind of thing. And again, we're talking about, again, we're talking about somebody, we're talking about people that are already sick.
Right.
And, that's, again, to talk to sick people about trying to do things to get well, it's important now, but to talk about how do you keep from getting well?
Right.
I think that's really, getting sick. That's where we're really trying to, the point that we're really trying to hit is how do I keep people well, keep them from getting sick? How can I give them those things that are going to help them and teach them and get that into their psychic in a way that now it's not a thing that I got to go look at the paper. It becomes second nature when I sit down to eat, and when I'm presented with something that I should not have. There's a light that goes on and say, no, you need to make a different choice. And that's where we really need to get to. And that's Dr. Graham often says that it's just a shame when you go into the grocery store that how all the stuff that you don't want your patient to have is made so conveniently to them.
Yeah.
As opposed to when I do occasionally cook, and I want to go and get ingredients that are good things that people need. And man, I got to go and find somebody to help me to find those things. But if I want to get candy cakes, cookie pops, wow, I have no trouble. But again, I always say the grocery store is not about keeping me healthy; they're about making money, and so we got to understand that. And but we need to have some kind of thing going on in our world and in our society, in our system, that does promote these kinds of things and help make people happy. Help make people healthier. I can go back and remember way back, when I was in high school and that time. And at that time, we used to we're going back, in the 60s. There was a time when health was was promoted. It was important that everybody have some kind of activity to help to help people to help these students do exercises, whether it be gym or whether it be other activity. That was something that was kind of pushed. And then that seemed to, over a period of time, I know by the time my kids got into high school, that was falling off. And so I don't know now today, kids sort of don't hardly have any kind of required activity. It was required that you took gym or you took some other course that had to do with you exercising. And so, so we're in a way, maybe becoming wiser but foolisher in terms of healthcare. At the age when if you can start instilling these things in the young people, that's the most effective time that they can learn to not do those things that are harmful and to do those things that are helpful to their health as they go along. Because the hardest thing in the world to do is to unteach something that's been taught somebody and then try to get them to relearn it and do it a different way. So if we can learn to teach them the proper way up front, man, wouldn't that be a fantastic occurrence? So
I agree. Getting it in the early part of their journey is critical, and I'm sure all of our our audience would agree. And I want to do a real quick shout out to Nellie Parnell King, who's saying good evening. Connie Taylor is also saying good evening to everybody. Harriet Scott, another good evening. So I appreciate that. Harriet Scott also says, thanks for sharing. While Carl Bogan, I know him very well, saying, love it. It looks like Pabita is saying, good evening, doctors. That's on YouTube. Jackie Robinson saying, good evening. And Harriet Scott saying, needs to get motivated. And I agree with that. Stephen Brown, hello, doctor. So true, Dr. Miller. And then, of course, Sandrell Scott saying hello. So I appreciate your sentiments, Dr. Miller. What's been your experience, Dr. Graham, in terms of being in a clinic and trying to incorporate nutritional changes into the clinical practice?
Well, it's really interesting that my evolution is almost exactly the same as Dr. Miller's. But there's some important parts along the way, because oftentimes I would encounter very motivated patients who say, I have this disease. Is there anything I can do or I shouldn't do? So for rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, it forced me to know those things. So I'm prepared to give them that information. And that became part of my routine. Now, there are two other rather interesting parts of rheumatology. One is gout. There's a large part of gout that has a lot to do with what you eat. So every time I saw a new gout patient, they got a diet, what you could, what you might, and what you shouldn't do. And osteoporosis is another one, because very often they're not getting enough calcium and vitamin D in their diet. So I'd be very careful about being able to measure that, make recommendations, and get them back to therapeutic levels. So, as you encounter patients, as you start to incorporate this, you have pre-prepared materials that you can give them, because otherwise, either you're not going to be successful, they're going to be frustrated, or you're going to have the same thing happen over and over again. And it really helps when your patients can feel some success and some buy-in and participation in what's going on.
I love it. And I think the knowledge is evolving. So before I started my metabolic health journey, I was, a lot of the materials, Dr. Miller, you suggested there were printed materials. So a couple of things have changed since my earlier days. So for example, even today, large health systems have a standard of care that says if you're dealing with hypertension, you should target a DASH diet. But as things are evolving, we're learning that when there was a recent study that would compare DASH diet to keto, for example, and the keto diet was twice as effective. So now you have a conundrum, because you have a system that's giving you a standard recommendation. And then for patients, they need to understand that if things change, it takes a few years, because it depends on what the health system is. What are they following as their standard for? Is it the Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association? And so a lot of times when these changes are occurring, it may not be manifest right away. Even gout is an interesting one in particular, because when I was in my training, one of the things that they told the carnivore guy to avoid was meat. Ironically, what I find is that people who do keto or carnivore, and they have to do it carefully, because if you start your journey with a high ketone diet like keto or carnivore, what happens is you're going to make ketones, and as your body tries to excrete the ketones, it's going to inhibit you from excreting the uric acid. So during that introduction phase of that diet, it can actually make you have a flare. So I think with a doctor who's understanding this, they may say, well, you know what, I'm going to give you a little bit more of your medicine, or we're going to ease into this. This is the magic, though, is that once you adopt that dietary pattern, and in this case, you may want to not go in and out of it, you will find that you will become metabolically healthy, less inflammation. And it's that inflammation that may be a big trigger for you to have a flare. So you'll actually sit there with a ribeye and actually be able to eat it, because you're not inflamed, and it won't cause the kind of symptoms that we thought. So it's very nuanced, and it doesn't mean that you have to go down that path, but it's just to make people aware that we have to adapt to the the new science and be flexible, and then let people do what makes the most sense for them. And we also, with Advocate Health, we have the videos going, etc. So we have to kind of keep putting health and lifestyle in front of people. It looks like the carnivore mommy, who's in Algona, Wisconsin. Doesn't sound like the big city, so I'm assuming that's a small town or rural. And we thank you for joining. But she had a question: if type 2 diabetes is reversed with normal A1C for a year and no meds, can that diagnosis be removed, or is it once you have the diagnosis, you are always stuck with it? I'll let you guys comment, but I'm going to say what's been my experience. I actually had this conversation with the leaders within my health system, because one of the things that I try to do is, if I can remove a diagnosis from the chart, then this push to put people who have diabetes on a statin, I can say, well, they don't have diabetes anymore. So for me, that works very well for a person who has some issues with a statin, although there are times when you need it. Having said that, my experience has been carnivore mommy that it is optional. It's based on the doctor's preference. There's no law, at least I'm aware of, that says once you have a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, you have to keep it on a chart. But there's a lot of politics, because are if you have a diagnosis, then there then the value of that patient in terms of resources to build programs around nutrition is greater, because we basically get paid based on how sick you are. How backwards is that? So instead of getting paid on how healthy you are, in other words, I should get a bonus every time I take people off of insulin. I should get a bonus when I take them off the medicines for diabetes. But instead, I get paid more if I can say diabetes with cataract, diabetes with glaucoma, diabetes with retinopathy, diabetes with neuropathy, diabetes with nephropathy, nerves and kidneys. So I think the health system is a little backwards, in that we get paid more the sicker you are. So if I take all of those diabetic complications and reverse them, I actually get paid less as a doctor. So we need to change that and incentivize doctors to actually make maybe more money because the patients are healthier. So my short answer to that question, that was the long version, is it's the doctor's discretion. And if you work with a doctor like me, you would probably see that removed from your chart. And that's my rule of thumb, is if it's 5.6 or lower for a year, I will remove that off a chart. And I use that as a hook. I'm like fishing. So I see them jangling on that hook, and that hook says, nobody ever told me I can reverse type 2 diabetes. And not only can I reverse it in theory with those numbers, but I can actually remove that from my chart. So there's no rule to say you can't do that. But have you guys, I don't know if you guys had to think about a question
Yeah,
like that, but what's your
yeah.
thoughts?
Yep, I mean, I do, because obviously, practicing internal medicine and having been there through the evolution, and still the management, as well as the tools for monitoring, are continually evolving. And I have sort of I look at it in two ways. One of the ways is that, yes, it's a good idea to remove problems that may be somewhat of a stress to people, to having them, if it bothers them, or even it can be detrimental if they decide to purchase insurance, all these kinds of things. They have to pay a different premium than if they don't have these problems. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is sometimes, just in the way that things are done, sometimes we do need to have something as a reminder that this person had this problem back then, and
That's
therefore I need to continue to be aware,
right.
and even maybe from time to time to monitor, to make certain that the condition has not flared up again.
Yeah.
Because the way that we are as people, when we get away from something, we tend to relax. We tend to sort of get away. We tend to forget about what it is, and then almost forget it, that
Hmm.
we've had this condition. And even though that condition may be there because of circumstances and things that were going on in terms of how we were, our diet, our activities, but the better we feel, when somebody gets real sick, and you put them on medication, I find this that they comply so easily, but when they get better, compliance decreases. And so just for a compliance thing, in terms of the doctor as well as the patient, sometimes we do need to have something there to remind us that this thing may still be out there if we don't behave in a certain way. Yeah.
That's
So
excellent.
it can be a double-edged sword either way, but so you have to really look at who. So with some patients, they learn their lessons and they won't ever do it again. But with the majority of our population, that's probably not the situation.
That's right.
Majority of people, and I get my foot out of this trap.
Well, that was brought up. Like when we had this discussion in our health system, those are the arguments that went back and forth. Some of it was, again, how do we ensure that people don't get off track? And one thing I'll be honest about, it's just like my belly. So I went into this whole low carb, keto carnivore space because of irritable bowel. The moment I stop eating this way, it'll come back, no question. So it's not like it's gone. So I think if you have insulin resistance and your body's making all this insulin, and even if you heal from it, you're not truly healed. It's just put into remission. It's reversed, but the moment you go back to that old dietary pattern, compared to the next person, you'll immediately kind of go back to that person you were. So I think that there's value in that. I continue to use it as a hook, but I totally respect when other colleagues say, you know what, I think I need to keep this in front of me. I'm always going to be checking the A1C anyway. I also do fasting insulin levels anyway. And I also do C-peptides. And one of the things I want to say out loud, and I made a video recently with an endocrinologist, and the video is going to say something like, so what's the one test to know whether or not you can reverse type 2 diabetes? Well, you have to do a C-peptide. I mean, if you don't make C-peptide, which is going to give you it's like the pre-insulin. Before insulin is made, you need C-peptide, you need the islet cells to create all of these things. But at the end of the day, if you don't have C-peptide, then you probably are going to you're going to be a type 1 diabetic. So I really appreciate that questions. Any thoughts, Dr. Graham?
Well, I like both of your answers. And I agree that my experience has been that, when you are not an independent physician, but you're part of a larger group, they do want you to use as many diagnoses as possible.
Yeah.
So that they're compensated that way.
Right.
But what really struck me about this is the public hears a lot about value-based medicine.
That's right.
And to me, the value is what you were talking about. When you get them off medications, and we should be compensated, that should be the real value, not the other value that we're facing.
Right. And there may be a way to do both. Like maybe because we don't want a person who has rheumatoid, congestive heart failure, COPD, and 10 diagnoses, that some of which you can make COPD better, but you can't probably reverse it in the same way we're talking about type 2. So we do want to have a little bit of a balance, but to penalize people for healing is a mistake. So maybe we can kind of compromise and say we're going to still compensate people who take care of chronically ill folk who have diagnoses that they may struggle with. But I would argue 80% of them are able to be put into remission. And I just want to say that out loud. I do want to do another shout out to Carnivore Mommy. It sounds like we had a meetup. We're working on a documentary, and it's called Healing Humanity. It's going to be a carnivore documentary. But at the meetup, Carnivore Mommy was there. I'm curious, Carnivore Mommy, if you can just put, like, if you have a YouTube channel, I don't know if Carnivore Mommy is all I need to know, but make sure we got the hook in there so I can check that out later. And it sounds like it is a small city in Wisconsin, Algoma. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. In fact, the guy who is working on the documentary, his name is Kerry. He has a YouTube channel called Homestead How, and he's in a small town as well. So I'm going to get a little knowledge from my brothers and sisters from the small towns in the country compared to the big city where I'm at. No insanity. Renee, I want to say, hey, everyone is what she said. I want to say, hey, back to her. She's very engaged and always, I find her when I find myself on other channels, she seems to be following me around. So, so she's amazing. Laura Leon said, good evening. And Hallam Appleton Simmons says, staying on track is hard after getting the results you want. And maybe we can speak to that. in a moment. Eat Fat said, "Hello, everybody," and then Janice said, "I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in May 2013, then diagnosed with breast cancer stage 3C in December 2013. 2014 was chemo surgery, more chemo. My diabetes was ignored. Oncologist said, eat any food to maintain my weight." That's a huge mistake. You guys may not be aware, but I recently did a cancer. Welcome, Dr. Mason. I recently did a cancer video with Carrie of the Homestead How. During that video, we talked about how dietary changes plus fasting during chemo plus some repurposed meds and supplements are the key to treat cancer. So Janice, what I would say to you is just search in YouTube, Dr. Tony Hampton Cancer. You'll see those videos plus the Dr. Paul Merrick, who created a monograph with his team. It's important you check that out because number one, you're not doing chemo now, but those repurposed drugs and supplements are going to be critical to get to the stem cells, which are the things that lead to metastasis. So if you can address those, not with chemo radiation, because chemo and radiation doesn't deal with those slow-growing stem cells, they deal with the fast-growing cancer cells. I would engage in that, and of course, I would look into the dietary pattern as discussed. The carnivore mommy said yes, should have added with normal fasting insulin and C-peptide as well, which we mentioned. Maybe just having reversed in the chart so that it is in the mind, but says reversed. Now, if we can get reversed, we may have to say remission because they're not ready for reverse. They're not ready for reverse. But I agree, carnivore mommy, if there's a way to kind of put a kind of an asterisk by it. But, we can also say, is history of, would that work? Right? History of, and then that'll keep it in the highlights. And then, but again, it all comes down to insurance. This is a business too, guys. So we have to always think about, and she said correct pronunciation, because I'm from a tough neighborhood. I can't pronounce hardly anything. And Dr. Mason, so, we're just touching on, what we learned in medical school as it relates to nutrition and how that's, impacted how we practice. And I was just kind of going through some of the comments, and I'm gonna go through a couple of more, and then we'll continue the conversation with you guys. Janice also said, I had 36 doses of radiation too, all that kept my diabetes raging. The cancer is back, but I'm carnivore this time. And then she mentioned the regimen that she's using. But again, what she mentioned previously is that the diet, they tell you to eat because they're so concerned with weight loss that they will then allow you to feed yourself anything. And, when you're in a chemo ward and they're handing you, cake or cupcakes and bagels and juice and all of that, they're really not aware that cancer, based on the Warburg effect, cancer is basically fed by sugar. So we don't want to feed sugar to people who are being treated. My doctor, this is from Sandra, my doctor agreed to remove CKD from my care plan because carnivore got it down to normal levels. If I end up needing vancomycin again, I know to keep it in mind. My doctor will always check. Thanks for sharing that. There was something Pabita said, Janice, she was speaking to Janice, look up Jeff the Prosperous quickly. Jeff the Prosperous is an example. He was in one of those videos. Jeff was diagnosed with lung cancer. He learned about the things that I shared in that video. He was told that he'd be dead a year ago, and he's thriving with intermittent, with fasting, dietary changes where he reduces excessive carbs, and the proper supplements. So I'm gonna tell you guys, there is hope. But Jeff is an inspiration, and we have other examples. He will also be featured in that, Healing Humanity documentary. So I'm gonna stop there. Dr. Mason, again, we're talking to the crowd. But if you wanna make any comments about the question I posed to my fellow colleagues is, what were you able to include nutritional education in your clinical practice, or was it just too hard to do? So were you able to kind of do that yourself, Dr. Mason?
I don't know if you can hear me
I
or
can. You
see me.
sound great.
Okay. But things were very early, and the short answer to your question is yes. So
Mhm.
much so that we had about another 3,000 square feet of space in the back of my office that we rented to create a lifestyle center. And in that place, we equipped it with um, free motion weights, which were the state of the art at that time, using things, doing some very state of the art, using some very state of the art treadmills. We had an exercise physiologist, strength coach, and we also had a food. We also had food, and for those people who wanted that, we provided them with an opportunity to purchase vegan meals at that time. This was many years ago, and this was part of the practice. In addition to that, we used the strength training material because a lot of the men who were suffering from prostate cancer, particularly on anti-androgen therapy like Lupron or some of the other drugs, or early on we were doing surgical castration for this, and of course that did create some issues with bone density,
Mm-hmm.
and we wanted to make sure that we, especially those men that were being placed on these medications, a lot of these high dose medications that we used, and many different ways to sort of combat sort of combat some of the complications of some of the medications that we were using. So it was really very eye opening, and this was, oh my God, this was, oh my God, more than 15 years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
the back of the office, and we had people escort them right back to the show them where it was,
Mhm.
allow them, and we were able to work out a way for them to actually pay for it using some of their insurance benefit. So we can do some things when we get creative. And I think we need to be, and I think that's what I heard you saying, is that we need to be more creative.
Yeah.
I want to get much more aggressive on the food. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to have, hopefully, if everything goes well, a new farm, a different farm maybe than where we were. But we'll see how it all works out. But I do plan to continue with the growing of food, and in a sustainable way. So we farm sustainably, which means we use techniques that don't destroy the land, and it also helps replenish the soil. And then we use only natural supplementation for the soil in order
Mhm.
for it to be re-nitrogenized or whatever is necessary so that we can have a productive crop. But yeah, that's kind of where we are. I saw you guys for a minute, and then I lost you. So I don't
Well,
know.
you're actually interesting enough, Doc. You're very clear to us, and so our audience is seeing you. And I do want to, since I did share this on my channel, and I have a lot of meat eaters on my channel, I want to just help them, just give them a heads up that um, I'm in a carnivore space, you're in the more plant-based vegan space, but I think that's important that we remind people, because it's so
Mhm.
important that we have these platforms where it's not often you see people with different dietary approaches, and it's so nice that we can do that. But even in my health system, I helped to start a smart farm. So even though I'm trying to raise cows, we don't have cows, we have plants that we're raising, and so I'm totally okay. I just want people to eat whole foods, and I think that's important. I do also see that there was some clarification from uh, Pabita, and basically she said that Jeff, he, instead of lung, it sounds like he had colon cancer that went to the liver,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's where the But again, he's thriving. I do want to say, Veronica, hello to you. You're in Pennsylvania, and Katrina. I want to say hi to you as well, and also just just to all of you guys, Coach Bronson, he's a previous guest on the Protecting Your Nest podcast. He's a speaking to get. I mean, he'll make us all look bad because he's he's got that ripped body. But I actually had a chance to hang out with him. He was involved in the Reverse Carnivore documentary, so shout out to him. And I really appreciate the work. He has his own YouTube channel and doing a lot of social media stuff to teach people. And then I want to say hi to Addie Davis. And then we have Herbal Annie. Ask the Amish, been doing regenerative farming for years. Problem with them is too much sugar. So, and the Amish, we learned so much. I think Carrie, who's working on the documentary, learned, and his channel is called Homestead How. So he started Homestead How before he started doing his dietary stuff. But he learned a lot of dietary stuff from the Amish because they live, they kind of have a homesteading model where they try to live from the earth as much as possible. And even going back to you, Dr. Mason, even though some of the folk on this call are carnivores, when we talked about cancer, some of the supplements, they're not carnivore, they're like berberine, and they're like green tea extract. So there's a ton of plant-based supplements that are very helpful to deal with the stem cells and cancer treatment. So I really think it's, what I like about this community is that we're learning from each other and we're trying to figure out what's the best path for the person in front of us. You give them information and we do a little bit of an experiment to figure out what's going to be best for them. So if we can just live in a world where doctors like us, whether we're retired or not, are promoting wellness, and the fact that you guys, which is what I respect so much about you guys, the fact that you're on a platform like this, and not only in this setting, but beyond this setting, you're actually getting out there and impacting the world, so that when you leave this place one day, and it may be, it's going to happen, right? We're all going to leave. You would have left your footprint. You would have made a difference. You would have made this world better than you found it. And if we can all just imagine if we all could do that, if we all could have an impact on the world, and that impact is that we're moving away from the paradigm where we're managing disease and we're going to manage the things we have to one where, as you said earlier, Dr. Miller, where we're healing and preventing, and in many cases putting into remission, reversing, whatever you want to call it, those so-called chronic medical conditions. And that'll restore hope to so many people who have lost hope because they feel that in order for them to exist, they're going to have the same outcome that their families had. Now, and I guess I know we're not going to have a lot of time, but I want to ask you guys, when you think about, I'm going to talk about me really quickly. When I think about my family, and I want you to think about your family, have you seen that you are kind of destined for the things that you see in your family? Or are you finding that that's not true for you? Now, I'm going to tell you, for me, even if I just start with my biological dad, now I want to do a shout out to my stepdad. We call him Papa Ed. He's the dad that kind of has been with me, but I'm going to shout out to my biological dad, and say hi to him as well. But, had some issues when he was in his 20s and 30s, rather it was blood pressure or whatever. And I'm thinking about that and thinking, well, that's my destiny, because if he had it, then I'm going to get it. Well, the last time I checked my blood pressure, it was like 110 over whatever, you know what I mean? So, and that's with no medicine. So I think I've learned that if I impact my environment, and that could be what I eat, that could be, the stress level and all these other factors, then I'm not destined to have the outcome that many people in my family have. So when you guys think back on family and things that they may have succumbed to, have you guys found it difficult not to have the same outcomes that they've had? Maybe Dr. Graham, you can start.
Well, it's a great question, Tony. The answer is I have problems on both sides of my family. My mother died from colon cancer. And so I'm very clear I'm going to get checked on a regular basis. So that's pretty clear. The other thing is that as my father got older, his bones got brittle, he had fractures. So I'm very much aware of that. I'm taking preventative steps and measures. So I know how long both of them lived. I want to make sure that I have the highest quality of life as long as I can. And that means you got to pay attention to those things. You can't say it's not going to be mine. It is.
I like that. Before you comment, maybe Dr. Miller, the first thing I do when I meet new patients is I say, let's review your family history. And the reason why I do that is because that's potentially your weakest link. And I don't do that to say that's your destiny. I do it to say we need to do everything within our power to reduce the risk that that's going to happen to you. So I agree with you. Like, know what your family history is and make sure you then start there. The good news is, and I'm gonna say this before you go speak, Dr. Miller, most diseases are metabolic, right? And there's no pill. I don't care what the people said who gave you the metformin or the Ozempic. There is no pill that treats metabolic disease better than lifestyle. And all you do is avoid the things that lead to all of these insulin spikes. And by doing that, you protect your blood vessels. I have a guy I have to interview tomorrow, Dr. Richard, and he is a neuropathy expert, a podiatrist that deals with the nerves. And Dr. Richard has learned that you don't fix neuropathy by taking gabapentin or Lyrica. That just blocks the symptoms. That'll help you with pain. You fix it by simply getting rid of the poison, and the poison is excessive sugar. So, Dr. Miller, what you got to say for us?
Yeah, so both of my parents grew up in in rural America, and their growing up had a lot to do with how they ate, what they ate as well as the type of food. And so, in addition to the problem that we talk about today in terms of the things that are naturally there that are good for us and the things that are maybe in certain plants or animals that are naturally bad for us, it's that extra stuff that the producers are now putting there to increase the production because they get paid by the pound. So and the faster things grow, the quicker they can make money. And so some of this requires a lot of things that when we consume them, these elements, we're consuming these elements, though we may be eating the tomato, whatever they put in the soil to make that tomato grow faster and bigger, that may or may not be good for us. We do consume that, and it does, have some effect on our body. So from that standpoint, so I sort of grew up with this whole thing of you sort of what you are introduced with early, that's sort of what you become accustomed to. And some of it is if you get if I can stuff that I didn't eat because we may not have had the resources when I was younger, and I get the resources now, I might try that. But I never uh, developed that taste to get away from the things that my parents introduced to me. And then as I grew and as I learned about healthcare, and I learned that those things were really the things that I ought to be eating, um, I then sort of made a reversal in terms of going away from some of the things that I had gotten used to, that I had started to like, that really were not good for me. And so from that standpoint now, and so both of my parents lived to a rightful old age. My dad had multiple myeloma, and he actually didn't die from myeloma, but so he actually went his myeloma where they were able to get it into remission. And I think the kind of strangest thing about it was that he also ended up in a situation where the myeloma did affect his lumbar spine and caused some an initial paralysis, and that he ultimately overcame and was able to get up and walk again from not being able to walk. Um, so from that standpoint, now their diseases, my mom did have mild hypertension, and she ended up dying from pancreatic cancer. But neither one of them went through long periods of having chronic condition related to the things that we normally are think of. And so, and I think that maybe a lot of that might have been to some extent how they ate. And so, so I look at it in this way that, that given a good start and learning to some extent that maybe the road that I had started down when I became the adult and became in charge of making my own decision, that I did not stray too far away from that, and began to get back to it and to learn how to even improve on that. That I think has served me well. And so I learned so what I found that it wasn't as difficult for me to eat stuff that
Mm-hmm.
was healthy. And I was always taught that when you eat, you're not eating because of enjoyment. You're eating because that's a necessary process to
Mm,
add things to you. But keep that in mind, and you don't
that's
need
right.
to overdo that. You don't need to, and you don't need to, eat things that are not contributing to that. And
Mm-hmm.
so, from a dietary standpoint, that has always been there in my mind. I mean, I've gone through periods where I like things that wasn't good for me, but at some point in time, I realized that hey, I need to get back. And it wasn't difficult because I had already been used to that. I'd already learned to enjoy those kinds of food. So yeah.
Nice. Well, I appreciate all of those comments, and and the irony is that a lot of the foods I enjoy are good for me, and a lot of foods I used to eat are not good for me. But and that don't mean I'll never eat sweet potato pie again. It just means it's not my thing anymore. I'm not thinking about that. I'm trying to put that good fuel in my body. So I think that mindset of food has a purpose as opposed to it's just there for some type of enjoyment. I do want to do a shout out to Westfield 90, who said such a great live stream. Did do a super chat, a super sticker, should I say, and that's just a way to support the channel. So I really want to do a shout out to you, and I appreciate that. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. We in order to keep these messages relevant for all of these folks out here thinking about having YouTube channels and stuff, sometimes the community will support it, and we really appreciate that. DC Learning to Live. I have been stage 4 follicular lymphoma twice, bedridden 5.5 years. He went on an animal-based diet, carnivore, and has put all his blood markers back into normal, healthy range, full remission. So he's a testimony that is possible. And for him, he went in the direction of a carnivore diet. Westfield 90 also said, if you do ketovore, carnivore first, then your hunger will get less and it will become easier to fast. Once your body starts using fat, burning belly fat, you won't be hungry. So, and all they're basically saying is that some people transition from low carb to keto to carnivore, wherever they land, it doesn't matter. But the bottom line is that if you use belly fat for fuel, you're not going to be hungry. And I'll be honest, I haven't, it's a little late, but I haven't had dinner yet, and I'm not even hungry. I'm going to eat when I finish with this, but I'm not hungry. It's the weirdest thing to exist and not be hungry. It's people don't believe it, but that's what happens when you become a fat burner. The carnivore mommy, saying, Dr. Tony, that was my 11-year-old Zoe saying hi to you. Amen to that. So shouting back out to her, you let me record. Yeah, you let me record. I remember that I was able to record something for her. So thank you for, putting her back in front of me. And if I can bless 11-year-olds, then I'm really doing good. A couple of more comments real quick before we let you comment, Dr. Mason. Janice said, I was keto and have moved more to carnivore. I just can't seem to get fat adapted. I'm hungry 2 hours after a nice steak. Dawn phenomena starts my day high. I never get ketones up. So it's really a challenge for some people. Sometimes it's because they need a little bit more healthy fat in there. Sometimes it's because of the hydration issue. But the good news is if you're eating the right foods, it doesn't really matter that much. It's okay to continue to eat something as long as it's the right thing, right? So as long as it's not the wrong thing, you can eat a little bit more food and not feel guilty about it. Jeremiah says, same thing happened to my mom with the myeloma and paralysis. It eventually got to her end. There was no cure at the time. So, and one of the reasons why we want to have these moments, guys, is because we want to give people hope. And back in the day, we didn't have a lot of answers, but I think that that's key. And the last thing I'll say before I let you comment, Doc, from Sandra, I think steak and butter gang coaching could help. So one thing I want to say is coaching is so important. Maybe what we're doing tonight is coaching somebody, but coaching and giving people grace when they struggle. If you're a human being and you're not struggling, you're not a human being. So when people struggle, it's not because they don't want to be healthy, it's because they're struggling. So your job is to figure out what's the root cause of their struggle and support them, and then give them grace. And they may not be ready. Maybe they're going to have their moment of change and transformation a year from now. Your job is to be a good mentor and model for them. And then when they're ready for coaching, you can coach them. But what we don't want to do is force people to be where we are because we've had great results. So Dr. Mason, um, when you think about your family and where they are and where you are, I mean, you've been on documentaries like Forks Over Knives. And so you're the face of a lot of this plant-based dietary changes and lifestyle changes. But so in that, you would think that they'd listen to you because you're the guy, right? So how has that been for you in terms of your ability to look at yourself, take your path, and then kind of reflect on your family?
Well, Tony, it would take a little more time than we have here since we're already over time.
Yeah. Yeah, we
So
are.
we'll have. I'll make sure that we do that later at another time when we have more time. But I will say this: I'm one of 10 kids,
Mm.
and we grew up in a family where it was very simple. That my mother had one axiom, and that is everybody that eats needs to know how to cook.
Mm.
And that's the way we grew up. And so we end up learning to cook the things my mother used to cook, all the beans and greens and fried chicken and everything else that was cornbread and everything else, and grew up eating that. Not much in the way of fast foods or any of those things from those fast food outlets. But I could say that, and we also always had a garden. There was always a garden, always something growing in the backyard, always something growing. If there was a city lot that got empty, it became a farm, and everybody pitched in. And so I am though my I would say if I had to figure out what in terms of eating style, I would say most of what we ate was a lot of it. We had some meat, but not a lot because we couldn't afford a lot with all of us. And the other thing is in terms of the greens, we always had a pot of greens or a pot of beans. We had every kind of bean you could think of: pinto bean, lima bean, great northern bean, black eye, all of them,
All
and
of them.
lots of rice. That's what we had, and whatever meat there was not in large supply. Many times it was because it was wild game. So father did a lot of rabbit hunting and squirrel hunting and things of that nature. So we can get to that in another time. But I would say that the biggest transformation for me has been after being a what I would call a super carnivore, because I was eating. I ate, like I said, I used to get my steaks cut from Mr. G's every week, 7 at a time, and I ate one every day, and it was
Mm.
always T-bone or porterhouse. I don't recommend that to anybody. That bought me a trip to cardiac cath lab where I ended up having 3 stents put in my heart. So I think that there's a balance that you need to think about when you are talking about these things. I don't, and Tony knows this. We have a friendly disagreement in terms of being carnivores versus more herbivores. I tend to believe to be more of an herbivore because I saw what it did for me, and I haven't had to have any more of those other kinds of scares since I've done that. And the other thing that I would add as we leave here is that don't leave out one of the most important ingredients that we need to have for our bodies: water.
Mhm.
And nothing substitutes for water. Nothing substitutes for water but water. And we need, if there's any plea that I can make tonight, no matter what else you're eating, you need to drink copious amounts of water because it's important for your metabolism. It's important for helping to release toxins that get dissolved in the urine and come out. It helps with constipation and things of that nature. So I'm going to stop right there because I know we're already almost 14
That's
minutes
right.
over, and I don't know.
That's right.
I think he's probably having a stroke right now.
That's right. And I'm going to have.
I'm going to stop. I'm going to
Well,
stop
hopefully
right.
not. We're talking about prevention, right?
No,
So
well,
yeah.
no, now she's not hoping to stroke, but she's tense at this moment.
That's right.
She
She's
knows
10.
we're
That's a
way over time.
better framing. Well, thank you, Doc. I think all of you guys, in fact, but let's just circle around and as the tradition, we're gonna go ahead and say, until next time and any final comments. So maybe Dr. Mason, you can just give your until next time.
Until next Monday, yes, understand that you are the most important asset you own. Your health is your most important asset. So whatever you need to do to keep your health in all three domains, that's mental, spiritual, and physical domains, you need to do that because that is the most important thing for you.
I like that. Real quick, Christian asked Dr. Mason, do you have a recommendation about how much water a person should drink?
I don't like to give a lot of recommendations, but if you're not urinating often, you drinking enough. True. And I'm
That's a
not
very
talking about urinating because you're diabetic or urinating because you have prostate issues or
right.
something like that. But your urine you shouldn't be dark yellow. It should be
Right.
clear. It should be,
Yeah,
closer to the color of water than it is to something else.
that's
So
right.
I would take that just as an overview, but certainly you definitely need to drink the water. If you're thirsty, you're already deficient.
That's fair, and I approve this message. If I know Congressman's not with us, but I approve this message, and I agree 100% with Doctor. The urine color should be your litmus test. There is no when they came up with the science to decide how much 8 glasses a day. It's not real science. So don't go by that. Go by your urine color. Go by your thirst. So, Dr. Miller, what's your until next?
Yeah, so I'm going to add on to actually what Dr. Mason said. First of all, that your health is your most important assets that you have. But what I'm going to say is that you are the person that ultimately should be in control of that. You get advice from other people. You get how you pay physicians, you pay other folks to get advice, but ultimately you need to decipher that. You need to learn that, and you need to control that because there's nobody with you 24/7 except for you. And
Mm,
therefore, you are the one and the only one that's going to know and be able to control what you do and what you don't do. And knowing those things, first, know what you need to have, know what you shouldn't have, and then manage that yourself. Make that your don't rely on anybody else to be ultimately in control. Rely on the experts to give you advice, because yes, you do not know something that you ought to know, but you can learn that, you can be taught that, you can be advised on that thing, you can discuss that, but ultimately you must control what goes in your mouth. Nobody else can do that except for you.
I like that. And so, if we were, were to be considered experts, we would welcome your ears and your eyes, but absolutely trust but verify. Obviously, if you had never heard of Dr. Mason and you only heard of Dr. Hampton, you would have a lean in a certain direction. If you had never heard of Dr. Hampton and only heard of Dr. Mason or Dr. Graham or Dr. Miller, you would have a different lean. So it's important. I listen to NSNBC and I listen to Fox. Completely different perspectives, but I got to hear both perspectives so I can at least walk away and have an opinion. And I've vetted both sides of the equation. So, Dr. Graham, until next Monday, what you got for us?
So I want to go back to the very beginning, Dr. Tong, because you asked me about education in medical school. 40 years later, in my national meetings, we began to have hours of CME on nutrition and our diseases. And every year that's increased. So what I'm trying to say is be prepared for things to change. And the things that you were taught to do 20, 30 years ago, maybe reassessed and reevaluated, and we may be doing something different in the present and the future. So be prepared for change.
Change is inevitable. And it's so funny you would say that as I kind of give mine until next Monday because I'm looking at Herbal Annie. My mom's name is Annie, so I like that name already. And I want to she said, I had a cheat day on carnivore, ate collard greens, loved them. Now, now, in what world is eating greens a cheat day? It's funny, it's funny. And in the world I live in, it's a cheat day. But I will say this: listen, when I tolerate certain vegetables. Collard greens just happen to be one. So when I'm having a cheat day, I'm absolutely enjoying collards. I just don't do it with cornbread because cornbread is just highly processed, food. If you have a splurge day, an indulgence day, and you want to eat cornbread too, that's fine. But we focus on eating real food. In my world, the animals are real food, and the non-starchy vegetables are real food. The Jiffy is not real food. That's just how I see it. That doesn't mean you never eat that. Absolutely, Doc. So for me, I think as I give my final thought is this ideal of being comfortable with the evolution of who you're going to become one day. I think everybody has a purpose on this planet. And in order to fulfill your purpose, you have to have a body that has the energy and the motivation to do that. So let's prioritize as we get close to a new year that we're going to put our health as the top priority. That does not mean that we don't put family near the top. That does not mean we don't put, our spiritual walk at the top if you're spiritual. But what it says is, how are you going to be spiritual if you're too sick to even to participate in the activities of the church? How are you going to be a great husband or a great, mom or aunt or uncle if you're always sick and you can't even get on your knees to play with the grandkids? If we prioritize ourselves first from a health perspective, then we lay the foundation to do all the things that you ever dreamed of doing. But in particular, you'll be able to live your life purpose. So for all those who checked us out today, we really appreciate that you care enough to spend time, on an evening to hear us, go back and forth, share thoughts, answer questions, because this is the foundation. If you just learn one thing tonight, you're going to be better off than you were the day before. So I really appreciate all of you guys. And I thank Nikki, who's kind of in the background, is going to end this meeting for us. But I just want to wrap up with that. I thank my co-host today for being here. I thank everybody that joined us who shared. And just thanks for spending the night with the Couch Conversations with the Doc. So with that, we'll wrap up. We'll see you guys next Monday. And everybody have a great evening. Take care.
Okay.